going back to what we listened in the morning, what we listened to in the morning, when I came here yesterday, the hosts told me that they're a bit surprised that I was able to come, having in mind the student protest in Sofia. But the problem is that the media, as usual, are overplaying the importance of the protests at Sofia University. So the situation is quite calm and stable, and fortunately, I'm here. So, first of all, some basic facts. Bulgaria is one of the smallest countries in Europe, both in terms of area and population. At the moment, unfortunately, it is vying with Romania for the unenviable position of the European Union country with the lowest personal income, which, by the way, is not so bad in terms, if you look at the world. If you look at the World Bank statistics, Bulgaria is called a country with a high average income, or something like that. Bulgaria and Romania are the latecomers to the European Union. During the long negotiations before the accession, the Bulgarian society was engaged in a painful soul search, a cacophony of dissenting opinions based on the deeply rooted uncertainty of the cultural identity of the country. Deeply inbred sense of insecurity, a feeling that the European characteristics of the society and culture are only a thin luster, a minuscule layer of Europeanness just on the surface. If you scratch it, the Oriental traits appear. 120 years ago, less than 2 decades of re-establishing the Bulgarian state after living for almost 500 years under the Ottoman Empire, one of the best Bulgarian writers, Aleko Konstantinov, paid a visit to the Chicago World Exhibition in 1893. For the first time ever, the young Bulgarian state has opted for a separate pavilion in which to show to the world the achievements of its economy and culture. The problem was that virtually no one has ever heard of Bulgaria. Puzzled visitors thought that the proudly exhibited colorful hand-woven rugs were made by American Indians because they looked like the ones made by American Indians. In a futile attempt to explain what Bulgaria is and where it is situated, the director of the pavilion had a huge map of Europe on the wall and a long sticky hand. He used it as a pointer for the puzzled visitors. Here is Vienna, here is Istanbul, and there we are, almost in the middle. This feeling of belonging and not belonging at the same time to what we call European culture was predominant in the years of negotiation. The Bulgarian society as a whole did not nurture any illusion that the country is being accepted because of its impressive, excuse me, they have printed it in a very interesting way, because of its impressive economic performance or democratic achievements. It knew that it had the good luck to be a part of a European process, and its value to the European Union lay rather in the strategic importance of the country. Situated at the edge of Europe, on the border with Asia and the Muslim world, it was destined to be a part of the European limes, the shadow region of nefarious divide between different sets of values. The Bulgarians felt, quite correctly I would say, that the average European knew little and cared even less about Bulgaria. And what he knew was, as a rule, a negative stereotype. And one of the few venues to change this perception, at least this is what the political actors thought, was to put a stress on the values of Bulgarian culture, on its contribution to the European culture. What is more, this idea was rooted in the European Agenda for Culture, adopted in 2007, which proclaimed celebration of diversity of cultures. And Bulgaria certainly was a country with a different culture. It was and still is the only Orthodox Slav country in the Union writing in Cyrillic alphabet. There are Slav countries in the Union, Poland, Slovakia, and so on. There are Orthodox countries, Romania, Greece, and so on. But the combination in Bulgaria is a unique one. The way how to do it, however, was difficult to agree upon. The nationalists exaggerated unashamedly the importance of the cultural heritage of the country. They claimed that the Thracian civilization, which thrived in 8th, 1st century BCE, was of no less value than the ancient Greek one, though different. That the Bulgarians introduced the Cyrillic alphabet in Europe, and the modern principle to conduct religious services in a vernacular readily understood by the layman. That the Bulgarians have saved Europe twice. In the 7th century, when the Bulgarian army defeated a powerful Arab army besieging Constantinople, and in the 14th, 15th century, with their resistance to the Ottoman onslaught, which slowed down the invaders. And in the meantime, creating masterpieces of religious art, icons and frescoes that predated Renaissance in Europe. The more reasonable were trying to find the place of Bulgarian culture, literature, and art in the palette of European culture, quoting names like the painters Jules Pasquen and Christo, who packed the Reichstag here, philosophers like Yulia Kristeva and Tsvetan Todorov, singers like Boris Christov and Anna Tomova-Sintova, writers like the Nobel laureate Elias Canetti, or one of the inventors of the computer, John Atanasov. Which are the agents of cultural diplomacy in Bulgaria? In the first place, the Ministry of Culture. Unfortunately, it has one of the smallest budgets among all the ministries. And this is the reasons why in recent years we are closing one after the other the cultural centers existing in different European countries. And the second agent is the Cultural Institute at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, its budget is even smaller and its activities are almost negligible. Which are the main activities in cultural diplomacy in recent years financed by the Bulgarian government? You can see the list. This list is very short, unfortunately. It strives to combine the notion of an ancient culture, the Thracians, and wealth, gold. No effort has been made to present the beauty of the Thracian funerary tombs, for instance, and temples with their architecture and statues. No effort has been made to show the Neolithic works of art. Contemporary art is conspicuously missing. Maybe it is thought to be too imitative of the major trends of European art and lacking original characteristics. Bulgarian literature is missing also, maybe because of the language barrier, though the play The Colonel Bird of the contemporary dramatist author Hristo Bojchev has already been staged now in 43 countries, which is a record for Bulgarian authors. A conspicuous omission is the lack of representation of the culture of sizable minorities living for centuries in the country. While in the minds of Bulgarian politicians, an idea of showing Jewish culture in the country is acceptable, Roma culture might be included, albeit hesitantly, both as a bow to the general mood in the European Union and as an exotic touch. The idea of showing the rich cultural heritage of Bulgarian Muslims, however, still seems heretical to Bulgarian politicians. The ministry indulges in what I call a potato policy. Everything valuable in Bulgarian culture is underground. The goal is to make Bulgarian past and culture an inalienable part of a common European past and culture, but it doesn't pay much attention to modern Bulgarian culture. There are, of course, objective difficulties to conducting cultural diplomacy. First of all, insufficient financing of cultural diplomacy and no real hope of changing the situation in the foreseeable future. Excuse me, they have just printed it. It's a bit difficult to find the pages. Lack of popularity of the Bulgarian language. Something like 9 million native speakers, and I would guess no more than 9,000 curious foreigners who want to learn it. Lack of specialists in Bulgarian problems in Europe. In the last 20 years, most Southeast European centers and programs in West European universities were closed down. We're fighting desperately now for the programs in Saarbrücken in Germany and Köln to keep them. Dependence on the persistence of negative stereotypes thriving in the faltering economic situation in Europe. An example that comes to mind is the stigmatization now of Bulgarians and Romanians in Great Britain, the Netherlands, and to a smaller extent in Germany and France. Let me quote a recent European Union paper. Seen from a Western viewpoint, it remains difficult to recognize some foreign cultures and to deal with them as equal partners. Let me tell you a joke. A patient went to a psychiatrist and told him, "Doctor, I have a serious problem. I have a serious inferiority complex." And the doctor said, "Oh, okay, we'll do what we have to do, and I'll tell you how to heal it." So they checked his blood, everything that should be done. And the next day, the patient called on the phone and said, "Doctor, the patient with a strong inferiority complex is calling." And the doctor said, "Don't worry, please, don't worry. It's not a complex. It's inferiority itself." So sometimes I wonder how a small nation can attract the attention of the big countries with its culture. It doesn't seem very optimistic, but this is real life. What are the possible ways out of the situation? First of all, extensive use of European programs in the field of culture. This started even before the accession to the European Union. As a rule, Bulgaria was a partner in the projects and rarely a coordinator. This was a period of amassing experience how to apply for them. Extensive use of cross-border projects in order to renovate, reconstruct, and publicize cultural heritage sites in the regions affected by the program. Use of structural funds and the programs of regional development. In recent years, the building of highways turned out a boom for the archaeology in Bulgaria because of the need to do preliminary research on the roots of the roots. Extensive use of educational programs like lifelong learning, Erasmus and Erasmus Mundus programs, and hopefully from next month, the Erasmus Plus program. Comenius, Leonardo da Vinci, and Grundtvig sub-programs that promote partnership and exchanges of best practices across Europe, helping both educators and learners to acquire new skills, were also very useful in preparing the ground for cultural propaganda. And of course, internationalization of education, and because I'm a rector of Sofia University, let me tell you a few things of Sofia University. It's the oldest, the largest, and most important, the best Bulgarian university. And when I say the best, I do not boast, but according to the national ratings, Sofia University teaches in 25 professional fields and holds the first place in 25 out of 25 fields. so I can say that. We are paying a lot of attention to internationalization of the university, different countries. We have a number of mutual agreements with hundreds of universities from all over the world that allow us to exchange academic stuff, allow us to organize exhibitions, cultural exhibitions, both Bulgarian abroad and exhibitions from these countries at the university. And we are, at the moment, we're the best university in Bulgaria implementing the Erasmus program. In Sofia University, we teach about 10% of all Bulgarian students, but we conduct more than 35% of the Erasmus exchange of Bulgaria. And we're the first university in Bulgaria that passed the limit of €1 million per year for Erasmus programs. It was several years ago. This, everything, you can see the comparison. Sofia University with the other Bulgarian universities here. It all sounds quite convincing. But we should not forget that for the multi-annual financial framework 2014-2020, the Commission proposes to allocate 1.6 billion for the cultural euro for the cultural sector. It is still less than €1 per year per person in the European Union. This is 0.16% of the entire EU budget, and it has a growth in 15 years by 0.0003% in 15 years, 0.003%. The important thing in Bulgaria is to establish closer connection between the growing tourist industry and focusing it on cultural tourism. In 2012, Bulgaria, let me remind you, it has a population of 7 million. Bulgaria was visited by 9 million tourists. By the way, this is one of the highest ratio in Europe of tourists per capita. 4.5 million came for longer vacations. So our task is to try to make them devote at least part of their attention to the culture of Bulgaria. We should put more effort in acquiring the status of UNESCO heritage sites for more monuments of cultural heritage in Bulgaria, because they attract the tourists coming to the country. Very positive. Well, unfortunately, sometimes we do stupid things. For instance, a sensation last year was the founding of a vampire by Bulgarian archaeologists. A skeleton with a stick, driven through the bones. But this was a very common practice, by the way, in the Middle Ages, and the media made it into a huge boom. And by the way, it attracted about 300,000 tourists. So it helps sometimes. It's very optimistic that Sofia, the capital of the country, is participating and is a candidate for a capital of European culture for 2019. And even it's more positive that the whole program is centered around the modern culture, the subculture developing in the big cities, and so on. And finally, it's very important for us to develop the regional cooperation, the Black Sea economic cooperation of the countries around the Black Sea, and among the goals of this are a number of initiatives concerning cultural diplomacy. And finally, Sofia University made a big exhibition just recently. Europe Discovers the Black Sea. And next month we're going to show it in Istanbul, for instance, where there will be the regular meeting of the Organization of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation. So these are the positive things that we're trying to do. But I really do not expect much results or very impressive result in the years to come.